would like to introduce our presenter this evening. Steve Mann has been a gardener since he was an infant when he heard his mom shout for joy, "Let's plant peas." Since then, he has worn many hats: carpenter, construction, business owner, construction engineer, computer programmer, business systems analysis, and now agroforester. All along that journey, he kept his fingers in the soil and lived in the seasons. In 2008, Steve took an early retirement from Sprint and pursued a new career as an urban farmer, selling at Bad Seed Farmers Market and through a CSA and co-op. Steve worked as a site developer for Cultivate Kansas City, developing 2.5 acres of community gardens in Kansas City, Kansas. He learned many lessons in his urban food system immersion. One of the main lessons was that agriculture, even organic, is ecologically unsustainable over the long run. In a pursuit of answers, Steve entered the master's program in agroforestry at the University of Missouri-Columbia, graduating in 2015 with a Master's of Science in Natural Resources and a graduate certificate in agroforestry. He is also a certified permaculture designer. So with that, I'm going to mute myself here. And
well, thank you, Beth. I appreciate those words, and welcome all you online and in the room here. And we're going to talk about compost, and hopefully we can get this thing to work here. Let's see, it's not running. We have to restart the presentation. Bear with us.
We may have to go to the mouse.
That's very slow.
If it's the clickers.
It's working now.
Okay.
All right, here we are. So compost has humus in it, and that's the most valuable substance on earth. Without it, we can't grow food. So that's why it makes it so valuable. And the earth has its own system to deal with dead things. You know, they decay, they break down, and they're recycled. And we call that the metabolism of planet Earth. We'll talk about that. So if we look at compost, people have been doing this for over 5,000 years that we know of. And the holy grail of compost is terra puente soils, and those are in the Amazon. They were put there over 5,000 years ago by the natives, and they contain more than 10% organic matter. And that's a big number, because the wheat fields of Kansas may or may not even hit 1% organic matter, which is carbon. And that's what feeds the bacteria in the soil, which give us nutrition. So it's very important. So backyard composting is a mixture of all kinds of stuff. As you see here in the photo, we've got those compostable plates and utensils, all kinds of pieces of paper, all kinds of stuff. Now, this pile here is going to have some more carbon put on it, the brown. We'll talk about that. But using compost improves the soil fertility and increases the water holding capacity of the soil, which is very important. Every 1% of increase in organic matter doubles the amount of water the soil can hold. And with the droughts we're having, that's very important. And we're also diverting all this stuff from the landfills, where it just makes methane. It goes up and heats the atmosphere more. So important stuff. So compost is a high quality soil amendment, but it's not that strong. So it would take 70 pounds of compost to add the same amount of nutrition as 10 pounds of your normal 10-10-10 fertilizer. So here we see a lab report on Missouri Organics compost. They're the recyclers out on Highway 40. And you'll see that the compost in the state they send it in, it has 1.2% nitrogen, 59, half a percent of phosphorus, and a little over 1% potassium, and it's got 21% carbon. That's a big number. That's good. And it's got quite a few micronutrients that plants need. And so what we're really doing with this compost is we're feeding the soil biome, the animals and plants that are in the soil. And so this is part of the metabolism of planet Earth. We have the carbon cycle, we have the nitrogen cycle, there's many others, but we're just going to focus on these because of these are the main components of our compost. So the carbon cycle, you know, when organic matter breaks down, it gives off carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide is eventually taken up by plants, and they use it to make protein and carbohydrates. Animals eat it. Those animals die, and the carbon goes back up in the atmosphere. So it's a cycle. And but what we've kind of done is we've dug up a whole bunch of 200 million year old carbon, and we burned it really quick. And so, you know, we've increased the carbon in the atmosphere, and the cycle is skewed and not working properly. The nitrogen cycle, very interesting. I think our atmosphere is about 70% nitrogen, and that's essential plant food. And they can't just take it out of the atmosphere. They have to either get it from nitrogen fixing plants like legumes, clover. Lightning also fixes nitrogen into the soil. And then as plants and animals break down, they release that nitrogen from their bodies, and it goes in through this cycle. And it can eventually be denitrified by certain bacteria, and then becomes a gas again. So those critters in the soil are part of the food web, and these are the critters in the compost pile. We have a lot of worms, a lot of little springtails, fly larvae, beetles, sow bugs, worms, nematodes, just all kinds of stuff. Here's some of the main important soil microorganisms. Up in the upper left, that's E. coli. We all know what that stuff is. In the middle, the red stuff is Acanthaomyces. It's kind of like a fungus, and it's also kind of like a bacteria. And it's very important. That's what gives soil that sweet smell that everybody loves in compost, is the Acanthaomyces. Over here, we have protozoas, you know, your parameciums, amoebas, other critters there. Down in the lower left, that is a nematode, and it's being captured by a fungi. The fungi's got those little loops there, and it's caught that nematode, and it's going to digest it and feed it to the plant. And if that's one of those tomato root nematodes that cause your tomatoes to die, well, not only did it feed the tomato, it got rid of a pest. And over here, we have little springtail, little tiny things. You see them jumping. And what they do is they shred up the stuff so that the bacteria can get to it quicker. So all this takes place at different temperatures. So between, let's say, freezing and about 100 degrees, we have the psychomorphic bacteria. Then we have mesophilic and thermophilic. So the red line there, that's 155. You don't want to get your compost over 155, because what happens, it starts outgassing the nitrogen and you lose it, and it goes up in the atmosphere. So we want to keep it below that. And what will happen, you do your compost pile, you get it all set up, and within a day, it heats up if you've done the ratio of carbon to nitrogen properly. And then over a few days, it'll start to cool down. This is when you turn your pile. These spots where it gets low here, that's when you turn your pile, and it'll heat back up again, because that bacteria needs oxygen to do its job. So this is the important thing about this bacteria and these fungi. They actually feed the plant. So on the left side, you see these little dots, those are nutrients in the soil. And this is a root hair. This root hair can only get the nutrients that it's growing into. It's not getting to these. But over on this side, we have the arbuscular endomycorrhiza fungi that actually penetrates into the root hairs and connects with the cells in there. And it takes the nutrients into the plant, and the plant gives the fungus sugar in reward. And it can actually tailor the sugar to send a signal to the fungus of what it needs. If it needs phosphorus, if it needs nitrogen, if it needs water, it can signal that to the fungus. And all around this little brown thing you see around the root is extruding those sugars into the soil to feed the bacteria. And that makes the bacteria transform the nutrients into a form that the plant can use. So this is important. This is why the compost is so important to the soil, or what we're adding to the soil. So we always want to, anytime we're designing a system, I like to go over what we need and what our goals are. So how much compost do you need? You know, if you got an acre garden, you're going to need a lot. If you only have 100 square feet, you're not going to need that much. And do you cook? Do you use, vegetables that you want to compost? Some people, especially older people, they do a lot of eating away from home. So they may not have that much to compost. Do you have a source of the browns, the carbon part, the straw, manure, hay, leaves? Do you have that available? Do you have critters in your neighborhood that could come in and spread the stuff and dig up your compost pile? So if you do, you're going to have to enclose the compost piles in a system that excludes those critters. You may want to do vermicomposting. That's using compost worms to do the composting. If you don't have a lot, we'll go over that. And you may think of joining a compost group. There's a Kansas City Compost Collective. There's just a bunch of these springing up, and the city, Kansas City, Missouri, is going to have a pilot program starting any time now for people to compost through the city. And then I think Olathe has already started their program of composting. The reason is putting compost in the landfills is really against, it's not against the law, but it's against the spirit of the law, because the law says that we should be not putting that stuff into the landfill. And it's valuable stuff. It's the most valuable stuff on earth. So, and you got to check with your city. So RJ lived in Compost Lake. There's a lake behind him there. And he had this was his dad's house, and he kind of took it over. Actually, he didn't live there, but he put all the leaves and brush in this compost pile, which was in an old trampoline. And so he filled that up, and one day he got a citation from the city there saying that they don't allow composting in their city. So I actually went to court with him as someone to testify in favor of compost, but the prosecutor said it doesn't matter if it's good or not, it's against the law. So you may have to get your laws changed if you want to compost in your yard, if they don't allow you. So there's various compost methods. Everybody probably seen the cold pile. You put all your leaves and debris in a corner in the backyard, and just let it sit there. And actually, after a couple of years, you get some really good, we would call it leaf mold. It's composted leaf. But it's if you have an acre garden, you're going to need it really quick. And there's the Berkeley rapid composting method. This was developed out in the University of California, and it claims that it can get finished compost in 2 to 3 weeks. And there's a link to their little PDF that talks about their method. Now, we also can do composting in place. That's called sheet mulching, where you put a sheet like newspaper or cardboard on the soil. Then you cover it up with different mulches. And Patrice Lanza wrote this book called Lasagna Gardening, and it's like composting in place. So you got the paper on the bottom, and you have some green, you have some brown in layers, and it's actually doing it right there in place. You could also, some people directly bury their compost or their scraps in the garden. That's inside to composting. You don't want to do it in the same spot, and you want to make sure your dog or cat animals aren't going to dig it up. And you want to rotate the spots you do that. And then there's vermicomposting. That's composting with worms. And we'll go over that. So that's the Essentiomyces in a compost pile. It's giving off steam, and it's got all this white threads and looks like a dust. Anybody seen that in their compost? Here's a 2-bin compost bin being built up. This is down in Leawood, Kansas. Here's the easy way. You just get a loop of fencing, 3-4 foot high. It'll take a 10-foot length to make a 3-foot circle, and that's what you want, a minimum of 3 foot. This is one of the easiest way, because to turn it, you just unhook the wire, set it up again, and move the stuff into the new location. So there's different styles of compost bins that you've probably all seen. Your pile should be at least 3 foot high and 3 foot deep on each side. And you don't want it really bigger than 5 feet. There's also, the wire composter. That would be good if you had critters, any of those 3 on the bottom. I've heard people have trouble with the tumblers. I've never used them, so I can't speak to that. So there's some rules of thumb that we could use for composting. 3 parts brown, that's a carbon containing material, and 1 part green, that's a nitrogen. And you don't want to use barbecue, grill ash, cooking oil, citrus, dairy, or meat. Now the last 2 there, well, let's talk about the last one, meat. So you could compost meat. They do it all the time at the places where they raise chickens and they have dead chickens. They compost those chickens, so it's possible. But you got to have a lot of oxygen. So they have systems that actually pump the oxygen in when they're composting that type of material. And one of the other concerns is you might have critters get in there and, mess with it. So these are your common food feedstocks for compost that we could use around here. You got alfalfa pellets. That's really your rabbit feed. It comes in 50-pound bags. Blood meal, soybean meal, hay, best if it's legume hay like clover or vetch. Then you have your other hays made out of fescue or brome. And then we have all these other materials. Now they're colored. The brown is the carbon and the green is your nitrogen. And you see here we have % of carbon and nitrogen in these materials in the pounds per square foot. So we can find a volume. Then there's the carbon to nitrogen ratio. 15 parts, the first one there, 15 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. And it's available fairly quickly. It starts breaking down fairly quickly. If you use or wet leaves, you want to make sure they're not all stuck together in a kind of a mat, So anyone online and in the audience here can get this free compost recipe calculator. The librarians will send it to you if you request it. So we're going to go there and I'll show you how it works. So over here, it's pretty small on my screen. We have materials and it has a drop down. I hope it works. I'm not seeing it on my screen. Anyway, I'll have to point to it. Do people see my pointer? Okay, so these materials, when you get it, there'll be an arrow here and it will allow you to pick through all these materials. And it will populate all this stuff here, but you have to put in how many pounds you're using. So if you have 10 pounds of garbage, you're going to get 5 pounds of carbon and 0.14 pounds of nitrogen. The rest is water and other stuff. So once you put that in there, you hit enter and it totals everything up, and then it gives you the carbon to nitrogen mix right here. So this stuff, 15 pounds of garbage, 5 pounds of coffee grounds, 10 pounds of fresh grass clippings, and some wood chips, that'd give us a 34-to-1. That's really close to our ideal, which is 30-to-1. The range can be 20-to-1 to 40-to-1. And what we're using here, a 5-gallon bucket is a little over 3/4 of a cubic foot. So that's why we have this pounds per cubic foot here. So that you can play around with this with whatever you have. You know, if you have chicken litter, you could pick that. If you have a lot of wood chips, you could pick that. So we're going to go back to our presentation. I don't know how to close that out. Yes, I don't see the same thing you see. So bear with us a second. Thank you. There we go. So you might want to kind of tailor your compost mixture to its use, what you're going to use it for. So if you're going to use it in your vegetable garden, then you want a bacterially dominated compost. So that means the first number is going to be low. So anything less than 30 is going to be bacterially dominant. And then if you want a fungal dominant soil, you want to be over 30, up to 40. And the reason you would use a fungal dominant compost is on native perennials, shrubs, and trees. And then the fungal or the bacterial dominant is for vegetables. So let's build us a compost pile. And we're just going to use the kind of the rule of thumb here. So we have a 3-foot compost bin, and we're going to put some small limbs in the bottom so it can be aerated, so we get air in there. And so we put our first layer in, brown, old leaves, straw, wood chips, that kind of stuff. And then we put our green layer in. And then we do another brown, might throw some hair straw in there this time. And as we do this, we want to water each layer in. So we repeat the green layer, and you might use, some of those other things like alfalfa pellets or the soybean meal. And then at the top, you cover it over with the brown layer. Now, this is pile's done. You could just let this go. And if you turn it, when it gets hot, you'll have compost, really quick. But if you don't, what if you start adding more materials every week or so to this? So you're going to have a continuous process. So what you have to do is, bury the new materials in the center if you can, and use the same ratio that you've been using before. Or you can use this. This is a aeration tool. I think you can buy it at Home Depot. You stick that down there, those tongs on the bottom fold back in while it's going down, and you hook onto one of those sticks down there and kind of shake it around, and that lets air get down in there. And you could also stick it in the center here and just kind of twirl it around, make you a little vortex to stick new stuff in. So you want to monitor your compost temperature, and you can get one of these handy dandy compost thermometers. They're anywhere from $10 to $20. Or you can buy one of these, like I did, one of these inexpensive ones used for cooking. But what I do is I just stick a glove on and turn this thing on, stick it in the pile, leave it in there for a couple minutes and see how hot it gets. So we want most of our decomposition, unless you're going to really turn these things, it's going to take place between 100 and 135. Because of that, we're going to have a lot of insects and worms in there because they can barely withstand it, depending on how hot. So in commercial composting, they use big machines to turn it, and they have what they call windrows, which are just big, long piles of compost, and they do it really quick. So you got to work that pile. You want to make sure the stuff that's on the outside edge gets moved to the center when you turn it. If you turn that pile every day, it could take 2 weeks to get the finished compost. If you turned it every other day, it'd take 3 weeks. So the longer the interval between turning, the longer it will take to finish. It's best if you could kind of grind up some of this material between 1/2 inch and 1.5 inches. It goes faster. You want to make sure the pile is about 50% moisture content. If we're going to have big rainstorms, you might want to cover it with a tarp, and you might have to water it during a drought. You don't have to put soil in there. Some people say to put some soil or some other compost in there as a starter. You don't need that. It just adds weight to your pile when you're turning. So it's not needed. Those microbes are all over in the air and then on the plants. So we don't have to do that. So you know your compost is ready when it stops producing heat. It's rich, dark brown, and it smells like the earth and crumbles in your hand. So you want to use your compost in your vegetable beds, containers, around trees. With potting mix, you could put up to 1/3 compost. You could top dress your lawn with 1/4 to 1/2 inch. You want to put more than that, or it will smother your grass. So it's not a good thing. You can use it as a soil amendment or as a mulch. Soil amendment, mix 2 to 4 inches of compost in the top layers of the soil. As a mulch, just work it into the 2 or 3 inches at the top and stay back from the plant stems. So now we're going to talk a little bit about compost tea. These are sweet potato leaves, and we sprayed compost tea on the plant that I got this leaf from, and we didn't here. So you see that the leaf is twice as big, and all of them on the section that we sprayed, all the leaves were darker green like this and bigger. We also use compost tea when we do solarization. So this is a way to get rid of grass so you can plant. So this is a plastic sheet. You put this over the soil during the hot part of the year, leave it on there for a couple months, and it'll get up to 130 under there and pretty much kill off, just like you were composting. You're adding heat. It's going to actually kill the bacteria and the other critters, so you have to add them back. That's why we're going to spray it with compost tea. So after we got rid of the plastic, raked up the stuff, we put an inch of Nature-Wise compost from Missouri Organic, and then we sprayed it with compost tea. And here's the recipe. And you guys can get this presentation from the library, so you don't, yeah, you don't need to take notes if you don't want to. So let's go into our vermicomposting. And we're going to use red wigglers, the Encidifidata compost worms. So they're not really earthworms. They don't go down into the soil. You find these in piles of horse manure, piles of cow manure, or compost. You'll find it in leaf litter, but they don't really burrow into the soil except to escape cold. But there they are in horse manure. I saw an ad in the Casey Star for a stable that was giving away their horse manure. I had the big garden, so I said, yeah, I want to get some. I went there and I got the horse manure. It was full of these worms. And so I got them out of there and I started raising them, and I actually used to sell them, and I used to sell the worm castings. Till the critters got in my worm bin and ate them all. Raccoons love earthworms. So here's some different style worm bins. I made this one out of kitty litter buckets. And you have a bottom one. The bottom one doesn't have holes in it, and it catches any liquid that comes through here. The middle one is basically where the worms live and breed, and the top is where they eat, and you put their food in there. There's that's what they look like when they're eating. And they don't like sunlight or light at all. So as soon as we pulled this off, they all hightailed it deep, and you couldn't see them after a couple of minutes. But we can use that behavior to harvest them. So this is the stuff you could use for your worm bedding. They need to have adequate moisture, 60 to 85% moisture. So if you had the shredded newspaper, if it was wet and you squeezed it in your hand, you don't want it to drip water, but you want it to form a kind of a ball. I don't use white paper because it has bleach in it. It's not good. Or those slick ads you get in the mail. Don't use those. Best thing really is egg cartons and cocoa coir. So this is how I rounded up my first herd of red wigglers. So I've got this piece of tin. It's painted black. It's got these corrugations in it. So I laid out my compost, or my vermicompost on there out in the sun, and the worms, they go deep as they can. So they get down in those little trenches, and I just move the worm castings away, and there's the worms. Got a ball of worms. So you got to make them happy or they're going to leave. A lot of people have worm bins, and they'll find all the worms out of it, trying to escape. And there's something in there the worms don't like. It's either too dry, too wet. They're just trying to get somewhere else. And they can double with the right conditions every 60 to 90 days. They eat half their weight every day in food. So if you buy, let's say, a pound of worms, you want to feed them half a pound of food a day, but you want to just feed them once a week. You want to put all that food in there once a week. Keep the moisture content 70, 90. You want well aerated. You don't want to have a spot in there that, really wet and they can't breathe. They breathe through their skin, so they have to, have air. And they can, they're best between 60 and 86, 90 degrees, let's say. They can live, if they're outside, they can live around freezing for a couple days. But what they do is they dig deeper, and they don't like sunlight, so you have to shelter your worm box from sunlight. So here's the Pendleton Heights, excuse me, Compost Collective in the neighborhood there. They go around once a week and pick up the compost from the people that signed up for it. And here's the Compost Collective KC. They have a site, you take it, or they'll for free, I think, and then they will come and pick it up, but it costs some money. So that's it. Well, we're a little early, have time for questions.
For those of you online, feel free to type any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll get those answered for you. As I mentioned before, I will be emailing out the handouts and the PowerPoint to folks when we're done this evening. So you will get that as well. You'll also find a link in that email to our survey for those of you who are online. If you can fill that out, let us know how we did. And also if you have thoughts on other topics or types of programs you would like to see, we always like to hear those as well.
All right. My goodness, no questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
Okay. We're getting ready to plant a bunch of trees we got in the Missouri Conservation Department. Should we put some compost down to the hole of the tree roots? Or put the compost around the top?
So the question is, the patron is going to get some trees from the conservation department, and they're wondering if they should put compost in the hole and plant the tree. I would say no, because native plants don't need fertilizing, because they've evolved out on the prairie and there's no one fertilizing it. It's self-fertile. So I would say you don't have to do that.
Put anything around the top so it starts feeding from the top down?
No.
No.
No. Plant it in the soil you dig out of the hole.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, you can mulch with it later. I wouldn't do it the first year though.
Okay.
Yeah, let them go the first year on their own. Yeah, just a little bit too. What will happen, especially if you use it on native perennials, like echinacea, they'll grow so tall they fall over. And you defeated your purpose of having a beautiful garden. It probably not that critical on trees, but still, I don't think they need it. Now, that's my opinion. Did they send you instructions with the trees?
They said just use a dibble, open up the earth and up to stop the roots.
Yeah, so they didn't say to fertilize it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's the common understanding on natives, and those are natives because they come from the conservation department. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, we have a couple questions here. First one is, who is the author of Lasagna Gardening?
Patrice Lanza. Can you believe that? Her name is Lanza and her book is Lasagna. Kind of a play on words there, I think.
And then any more information regarding using a tumbler composter? I am a beginner and was wondering the difference between that and the ones you described with the bins.
Well, the problem I see with a tumbler is they don't hold that much. From what I can see, the ones I've seen aren't really big enough to have that mass. You need that 3 cubic feet mass to actually allow the bacteria to get hot. So I don't think they get hot. So I think they're kind of a slow compost method. If you're a beginner, I would recommend getting just some fencing and make the hoop. If you have critters, you could just cover the top of the hoop with a piece of fencing too. I hope that answers your question.
When you describe doing brown and green layer and composting, is that also for garbage, or is the garbage composting different?
That's the same. So the question is, making the layers of brown and green is, does that pertain to using garbage as a green? And yes, it does.
Okay, I have been tossing kitchen scraps, veggies, eggshells, coffee grounds, spent flowers into a pile for years. I'm thinking that I should be grinding up my leaves, brown stuff, in addition to the scraps. I don't turn it. Is it not any good?
Oh, it's good. It's just slow. Yeah. You know, if you don't garden and you're just using it maybe in some house plants or in a few you know, perennial beds, slow is good.
Are more municipalities allowing composting?
I think most of them do. I think the Lake Wacomas incident was just a kind of an outlier. It's a rarity. And I can't imagine why they would even go after him, other than maybe a neighbor complained. Because I'm sure they don't go around in Lake Wacomas looking for compost piles. I mean, they could be picking up wind-blown bags or something instead. All right, well,
Any last questions here online?
yeah, here's your chance to ask questions. There's no stupid questions, there's no dumb questions. We all have our own level of understanding of things, so throw it out there. And if you have friends that might be interested in this, I'm going to be doing, I think, 5 other presentations at other branches. Like tomorrow is in Smithville. In a couple of weeks, it's Lone Jack. We'll be in Independence on a Saturday afternoon. So that's an opportunity. And you can go to the events page on the library website, I think, and find the dates and the registration link.
That is correct. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming this evening. We enjoyed having everybody. So we hope that you will fill out the survey that I will be emailing. And if you're in the room, if you'll fill one out and leave it before you go, we would appreciate that. And we hope to see you at some future programs. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you. Happy gardening. Thank you.